Hello, folks. Welcome to Rational Science. And we divide our lecture in three parts. First part, we usually do extinction. Then we do physics. Today we have transparency. What the hell is transparency? And then I open the floor up for questions, comments that people have made since last time. We're going to try to address those. Okay, so let's get started. This past Thursday, I had a little powwow, a little debate interview with Ed Dutton. Okay, and as usually happens in these cases, there's a little bit of interview, there's a little bit of debate. Not everybody sees eye to eye on all issues, so we don't have the same foundations on which we build our theories. And that creates a little bit of a problem because the interviewer is supposed to question you, and that's okay. But then if there are many questions, we all go on tangents, and we end up doing a lot of tangents. We get lost on the big picture. We don't really know everything that had to go on. You don't answer all the questions that you were supposed to, or address all the issues. And that's just the nature of the beast. You probably would need 15 hours to cover every point on which, to make sure that each point is covered and every base is set so that everybody can follow the whole presentation. Okay, so Mr. Ed Dutton, this differed with me in at least three issues. There were more that we did not see eye to eye on, I'm sure. But these were three that I kind of pulled out of the conversation that I had with him. Very interesting. Um, First one where we do not see eye to eye on is that he said that survivors will reproduce and restart population expansion, assuming there's a global economic collapse, which is what I'm proposing. Um, the question is, will there be some survivors? And my guess, I guess his guess as well, is if that happens, the global economic collapse happens, there will be some survivors. And the question is whether they will reproduce and restart the race. That's the question. And this comes from, I think, in a lot of these anarcho-capitalists. I call them narco-caps. And they have this idea that it's a good deal if the world collapses, the world economy collapses. And you say, what? You want the world economy to collapse? And they would say yes. A lot of them would, because they think it's a reshuffling of global economics. We raise the board and start all over again, with the fact that we know history, we know what happened in the past. We get rid of all the lousy politicians, maybe the military, and you do your own thing, entrepreneurship where uh, just trade with your neighbor and you have no taxes, no government on top of you. This is the notion a lot of these people have. And so they see it as a good thing, let the global economy collapse once and for all and let's restart the whole thing over. And so that's where some of these questions or disagreements start. And so he says survivors will reproduce and restart population expansion. And I'm saying no. When the global economy collapses, that's it for mankind. There will be no restarting of anything. And so these are some of the points that I want to address regarding that issue. Okay, let's start with that one first. Family survives. See, you got to look at this in every city. What's going to happen in a city? Okay, and a million people, they'll all kill each other or leave the city and look for food in the country, whatever. There won't be many survivors in the city. Whoever's there, whoever ends up being king of the mountain, has to be maybe a family, someone who trusts someone else. And maybe you're talking about 10, 15 people at most, I would think. And that family, for some reason, survived, managed to tough it out, beat out all competitors, and you have to beat out every single one because you're going to be planting and you don't want to leave anyone out there, stealing or from your agriculture or destroying your crops to create problems for you. No, you have to kill them. It can only be one king of the mountain. There's only one family or group that survives. And so that's the first issue you got to look at. Okay, it's not like we're going to be friendly with our neighbors or anything like that. Everybody's going to be an enemy of everybody else. Everybody will understand that immediately. Okay, now all of humanity has collapsed as far as you're concerned. You're the last humans on Earth. This group, right? And so you're going to already have a big psychological impact in that group. You know, you're going to look at the world and say, we're the last humans on Earth. So there's also already going to be a psychological impact there. Okay, think of that situation. Think of it as if you were the last group of people living in a city. There's no one miles around. Okay, and you're going to do subsistence agriculture. That means you're not going to be a nomad because you're not going to be doing hunting. There will be nothing to hunt. You don't see wildebeest running down the highway today, do you? So there's nothing to hunt. Okay, all the hunting has been done. We've killed all the humans as far as you're concerned. So you're going to be planting if you survive. And if you plant, you're going to be sedentary. There's going to be no one near you, by you, and near you. Okay, so you're going to have no electricity, no water, no internet, none of that. Okay, so keep all these things in mind. You're going to go into subsistence farming. Hopefully you are a farmer or you have some farming experience and you're not an office person. You're not an internet entrepreneur because you probably know nothing about planting. Okay, so that's another thing you got to keep in mind. And so these people say this group is going to reproduce and restart the human race again. Well, I don't know. I have a lot of problems with that because, first of all, women don't reproduce today, much less will they reproduce after the collapse when they're the last humans on Earth, this little party that's there that survived the whole Holocaust. And so the issue is, they don't have children today when they have doctors, they have hospitals, they have all the care that they want. And now they're going to have children in the streets, more or less, no one to help them. It's just push the baby out. Hopefully everything's okay, no cesarean or anything like that. So I don't know. I don't know if a woman will want to put herself in that situation as well. The old days they did it, but the women today, they're not prepared for that kind of stuff. Okay, out in the caves, I don't think so. Then let's assume someone reproduces. That group will have no genetic diversity. No. It's probably a family, people who know each other or are very closely related, and we already have humanity doesn't have any genetic diversity, let alone a group within humanity. So let's assume they reproduce. What's going to happen 2-3 generations later? Well, they're going to start growing 6 fingers. That's what's going to happen. They'll come out wrong because they came out of this founders effect, this group that founded the new colony. So it can't go on for many generations when it will collapse. That group will collapse. So that's another reason they probably would not have any children. They would just live out their lives. That's it. And lost the birthing habit. Women don't have children today. Why would they have children later on when, what's the purpose of having a child? Just to see what it looks like? Just to make that child? What woman will want to have the last child on Earth? As far as she's concerned, that is the last child on Earth. And will she have 2 or 3? What, so that they can intermarry, inbreed? I doubt it. So think about these things. And then, a brother will marry sister, essentially, because it's the same group. Is that what's going to happen? With all genetic diversity essentially gone? I don't think it's going to last too long. And they think of this as not the end, but as the beginning. And I doubt very much that's how you're supposed to look at this. No, when the global economy collapses, that's it for mankind. Okay, so I don't think they'll be reproducing or doing anything along those lines. Okay, next issue, more or less along the same lines, because he questioned, how about all these tribes out there, lost tribes that are not in contact with civilization? And a lot of people have raised these issues in the past with me. They say, well, what about the lost tribes? They're not in contact with us. And so I think they've got the wrong reasoning there. First of all, there are no lost tribes. We found them all. Okay, we know we've got satellites. For those of you who are not flat earthers, we can see a matchbox from the sky here on the ground. Okay, and so they know where everybody is on planet Earth. Now there are groups out there which have no relation to humans. To civilized humans. But what happens? Those hunter-gatherers, they'll be the first to go. I'm saying that we will kill them first. Why? Because, if you look at a city that is close by to these jungles or where these people live, they'll be invading their hunting grounds first to get something to eat. And then they'll be hunting the less technologically advanced tribes. They'll kill them all. So I think it's the other way around. The first people to go will be the lost tribes. Okay, the Amish. People say the Amish, they're great people. They do farming. They're very skilled. Yeah, that's why they're gonna die. They're the first to go. Why? Because they don't pay they don't pay for a security. They don't have a defense budget. They take that one for granted. And right now their defense budget consists of, the courts, police, the army maybe. They're protected. And who's going to protect them once all that's gone? No, everybody's just going to invade their lands and just steal whatever they want out of there. It's going to be like the locusts swarming over the land. That's what it's going to be like. So lost tribes, Amish, all those will be the first to go. They have no protection whatsoever from what's protecting them now. In fact, the Indian government, the group that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, the Sentinelese, Sentinel Island, it's the Indian government that's got to protect them. Because otherwise, other people would go in there and do all kinds of things there, which are, again, they have more knowledge, they have helicopters, they have guns. They would slaughter these people very easily. So the Indian government protects them. All these lost tribes are under protection right now. They will not have that protection later on. Okay, but the one that concerns me the most is the last one that I'm sure we didn't see eye to eye on, and that's that humans have more genetic diversity today than in the 19th century. That's how Dutton looks at this, and I think he conceded that we lost genetic diversity since the human race started. So if you go back 200, 300,000 years ago and you work your way upwards to where we are today, we lost genetic diversity over the centuries, over the millennia. And if that's the case, then how is it that we recovered or we increased our genetic diversity since the 19th century? And of course, we didn't see eye to eye on that one. And all I can do is smile. What can I say? If you don't agree, right? And I'm saying you cannot recover genetic diversity. Okay, this is a little graph that I made. It's in my book, okay, on the Neanderthal book there. And gives you an idea of why we can only lose any species for that matter, can only lose genetic diversity. It can never gain genetic diversity. Human population versus genetic diversity, and that's over time, okay? And I'm saying that mutations increase genetic diversity, but periodic population crashes. In other words, diseases, wars, etc., natural selection chops off genetic diversity. Big chunks of humanity die in wars and disease, and whatever little you gained, you lost in these big choppings. And so it's like this sawtooth wave, it's big crashes, and you have what is known as a founder's effect, followed by another crash, a population bottleneck of some kind, and then another crash, and so on down the line. And so all you're doing is streamlining the genetic diversity of humans from the moment that they began to inbreed. Okay? So we've been inbreeding, what, 200, 300,000 years? We should have very little genetic diversity in us. And this is hard for these people to believe because, the geneticists have told them something else, that we gain um, genetic diversity because of mutations. And it's like, okay, so we gain, and what did we lose? And I'm saying we lost a lot more through founder's effect and population bottlenecks. And this is what these people still have not caught on to. I don't think there's a single geneticist on planet Earth which will agree with me that we have only lost and we can only lose, any species can only lose genetic diversity over time. Okay? And if you add to the founder's effect and the population crash, the bottleneck, okay, if you add the fact that there's also inbreeding for all this time, that can only worsen the situation. And I'll just give you these examples here. You've got a fellow named Charles II. He was of the Habsburg family, okay, and King of Spain. And he was known as El Hechizado, the bewitched, okay. And why? Because, well, he was born with all kinds of problems. And, he had the famous Habsburg chin, which he inherited at least as far back as his great-great-great-grandfather, 5 generations back, which was Charles I, known as Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles I of Spain. Okay? And they had this Habsburg chin, and it's because they kept intermarrying, inbreeding within the family. And we had the same situation with the Romanovs. And you have Alexei Romanov. He was great-grandson of Queen Victoria. And there were 9 people within the Victorian family that had hemophilia. And he was one of them. And so, and it's because of inbreeding. You have the same thing with the Amish. The Amish have been inbreeding for 300 years. They came to America, like 500 of them. I have the dates there, 1717 to 1750. And in 300 years, they multiplied to 330,000 approximately that they are today. And for the most part, all these people just been inbreeding and come from that stock. So what do you think they have today? Well, they have a lot of genetic problems. What? Genetic problems. Okay, ailments or disorders, whatever you want to call them. And we've been inbreeding for what? 200, 300,000 years, assuming those skulls, the Homo and the Adalto and so on, are part of our lineage, which is probably likely because their skulls are very similar to ours. Okay. So assuming those are our ancestors, our predecessors, we've been inbreeding for 200,000 years. And what do you think is going to come out of there, especially with all these bottlenecks and founder's effect, bottlenecks, founder's effect? Well, what you're doing is whittling our genetic pool. And today we're all clones of each other. I mentioned the other day, and I mentioned this several times because people don't seem to pick up on that. There's a study, and here's a study that says that, a pack of chimps, a troop of chimps, maybe 100 of them, that live together and have sex within the group, have more genetic diversity than all the human race. All the human race, 8 billion of us. And it was surprising to the people who investigated this, and they said, how can that possibly be? If here we are, so many of us, 8 billion people, why would a pack of chimps, have more diversity than us? And of course, the geneticists have no clue why that's the case. And I'm telling you, the case is that all you can do throughout history, from the moment you begin inbreeding, is lose genetic diversity due to, again, founder's effect and bottlenecks, and also inbreeding. And so here, we have a pack of chimps that have more diversity than all of the human race. And it's like people don't understand what this means. This is very important. It's very important because it shows that genetic diversity is a function of time. So you want to know if a species is old or new? Find out how much diversity it has. If it has a lot of diversity, it's a new species. It started a few thousand years ago, perhaps. If it's got very little genetic diversity, such as the sheep, it's because they have a long line in which they've been inbreeding for who knows, maybe 100,000, 200,000 years, and today they've lost their genetic diversity. So I'm saying that if you go back in time, you can figure out, how old a species is just by looking at how much genetic diversity it has. And again, Mother Nature doesn't look at a species age, right, only through how many times the earth went around the sun. Okay, looks at how much inbreeding there was and how many diseases you went through and how quickly your population expanded. So there are other factors that you got to consider there, all that taken together. And again, I talk about that in my book, on the Neanderthal book, in more detail. Okay, so here's my take on that. And I'm not asking people to agree with me or to believe in this. I'm just saying this is my take on this. Okay, you take it for what it is worth to you. I'm saying this is the law of genetic diversity. Okay, a species, once it branches off from the mother trunk, it begins to gain genetic diversity because it meets different environments, different diseases, different animals, and so it conditions its genetics to that new world in which it's going through. And in the case of Neanderthals, they came certainly out of the Heidelbergs, or the ancestors which came before them, who in turn came from Homo erectus. Okay, so if you have a Homo erectus who, a pack or a family or a clan, whatever, going west, and they started to live in Arctic weathers, and then from that group, what branched out were the Heidelbergers, okay, and then from that group, another group branched out. They became the Neanderthals, all in Europe, Arctic Europe. Well, up to that point, they were increasing their genetic diversity from one species to the next. But what happens after that? Once they settle down, they become more or less sedentary. They don't, move to warm climates or whatever. Then after that, all they can do is lose genetic diversity. Okay, and eventually they end up at a point where they get used to endemic diseases, the diseases which would have killed their forefathers, no longer kill them. And the reason for that is that, all the people who had no defenses are already gone. And they didn't leave any offspring. So disease is a big sifter of genetics, of the genetic pool, and streamlines our genetic pool. So after millions of years, thousands of years, hundreds, thousands of years, millions of years, you end up with a species that has no genetic diversity. And one of the big animals today, the cheetahs, have very, very little genetic diversity. I think it's the number one with the least amount of diversity out there. And this gives you an idea that cheetah has been around for quite a while. Inbreeding, grew fast, very successful animal. The more successful it is, the shorter its lifespan. We were very successful, so we only lived 200,000 years. Dinosaurs were horribly successful, and so they lived 2 million years, much more than we did. And so you got to keep all these things in mind. Mother Nature handles these things, not, again, how many times the earth goes around the sun. You got to factor some other issues there. And today, here's an example of animals that have lost their genetic diversity. They're known as the lions. And here's a weird thing that you'll find among them. This is a female lioness, and she's got a mane like a lion. Okay, I think that's another one there. I'm not sure if it's the same one. But the point is, we're starting to see creepy things in the world of lions. Why? Because they lost their genetic diversity. I keep saying that there were like 150,000 lions only 30, 40 years ago, and there's only 35,000 today. So the pool, the population has shrunk, and within that, obviously, the genetic diversity has had to shrink. You're not going to get more and more diversity with fewer and fewer population, especially when there's been such drastic cuts in their population. Okay? So keep all this in mind. So yeah, we don't agree on a lot of things, and so it's very hard to get to the bottom of the theory unless you see eye to eye, at least in some of these things, or they're clarified. That's one issue. The other one I always recommend is that, we do Extinction 101 before we do Extinction 102. Okay? Okay, let's look at some of the issues that some people raised regarding extinction and in Neanderthals and so on. One fellow says, there was a case of a wolf boy in Cuba, talking about the appearance here, okay, that got the attention and love of quite a lot of girls, and I assume women, when he grew up. Okay, I guess he's talking about Little Red Riding Hood, seeing Grandma, what big teeth you have. Okay, and he says essentially, there are women go after ape men, men that look like apes, etc. Okay, and men going after anything that moves. Okay, we have these notions out there, these Hollywood-esque 21st century notions, and you make a big error when you compare that to what happened in the Paleolithic. Totally different context. People are just mixing things up. They think that, since humans today, you see videos there of men who go behind a cow, and do their thing. I don't think that happened in the Paleolithic, okay? But today, we have all these weird things. We have triple X, and people are oversexed and so on. So they have all this leisure time to think about sex, and so they think of weird things. And I'm not sure sex was that complicated in the days of the Paleolithic. I think it was just, I've got the feel, and you go to your squaw and you say, okay, get down. I think it was more simple in those days, sex. Today we have a very complicated world. We're bombarded by sex every morning, and so you can think of anything you want. But anyways, he was getting to the following. He says, so theoretically, it's conceivable that humans might be open to getting it on with Neanderthals if these were peaceful animals. And here he said, to a certain degree, a mouthful, because one of the issues is, you'll see some movies out there or some vids where they show a guy, sneaking up on a donkey or on a horse or on a cow. And they see humans will sleep with anything. They get this notion. I want to see a human sleep with a lion, okay, a lioness, right? Or a female who allows to be mounted by a lion out there in the wild. How about an alligator? Is that a good match there? Humans with alligators? So when we're talking about apex predators, and that's what Neanderthal was. Neanderthal was an apex predator. You have to consider him like a lion, like a alligator, like a shark. This guy was a top guy there. He went out. He went out for the kill. And you're saying that we just barge into his territory, knock on his cave door, and say, "Hey, do you have some sugar? And while you're at it, do you mind if I sleep with your wife? And I'll let you sleep with mine. Is that the way it happened? It was all friendly like? And let me hunt in your hunting grounds. Let me catch some stuff here." Yeah, sure. Again, people don't understand the situation here. And so, yeah, I have a problem with humans sleeping with Neanderthals. And here, let me show you a little story. Okay, it's a love story, so you'll probably like this. Okay, here's a love story. Love story of two apex predators. Okay, apex animals. One is known as the lion, the other one's known as a tiger. And now they're in different habitats, but it turns out that the tiger decides to migrate, and he goes, I don't know, to the Serengeti, okay, plains there. And he goes into lion territory, okay? Now, the first thing you got to think about is that, the worst enemy of a lion is another lion. They kill each other for the pride, for whatever. They got it in their genes. And the worst enemy of a tiger is a tiger. Okay? Turns out this tiger goes now into not a tiger territory, he goes into lion territory. Okay? Okay, he goes in there and he runs into lion territory, separated by time and habitat. Remember, these two animals, they have a common ancestor maybe 2-3 million years ago. And now, they're going to meet each other. You think there's going to be love at first sight? Or are they going to try to kill each other? Which would you bet on out there in the wild? Okay? And they have different culture. The lion is a social animal. The tiger is a solitary animal. I think I have a picture here of that, yeah. See, lions live in packs, in prides they call them, right? And they have kids and so on. The tiger, he's a solitary animal. He's got several females out there, each one also individual, lives individually, and he goes and visits each one, okay? But the tiger and the tigress are lonely animals. They don't live in packs. They don't live in clans, okay? So keep that in mind as well, okay? Okay, they have little genetic compatibility because they do have ligers and tigons, and they look more or less like this, okay? You can see that there's a little bit of a mixture there. But of course, these animals that you see there, these sorry animals, they're grown in zoos. And they have the tiger mate with the lioness and the lion mate with the tigress, okay? Things humans do. And a lot of these animals are infertile, they come out, even though they're born sometimes, they don't reproduce. Some of them do apparently, but they have to mate, I think, with one of the purebreds. Okay, so that's not clear in all these cases. But anyways, how do you think that's going to last? You have these ligers and tigons. You think they're going to meet with another one like them and have more kids and more kids and more kids forever? Or is there something wrong eventually with these mixtures? Okay, so keep that in mind. Ask yourself that question. Okay, so turns out they don't fight, the tiger and the lion. They meet out there in the Serengeti and they decide to make love instead of war. Okay, and again, they end up with ligers and tigons. And so, but now we're going to try to explain the disappearance of the tigers. It turns out the tigers became extinct. And so now you come, 50,000 years later, and you try to explain that. You say, okay, the tigers came out of India, they mated with the lions in the middle of the Serengeti. They have two different cultures. They were separated genetically for hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, but they get together, they have ligers and tigons, which apparently were infertile, okay? But we'll even concede that they were fertile, okay, just for the sake of argument. In order for you to explain why the tigers finally became extinct, you would have to have every single tiger mate with the lions. Because otherwise, if you have two tigers that mated, they would continue having tigers, and the tigers would still be around. If the tigers became extinct, it's because even to the last one that reproduced had to mate with a lion. It can't just be a one-night stand and this lion and this tiger over there. It's got to be the entire population eventually for all tigers to disappear. Otherwise, they will continue having tigers, and the tigers should still be around. Okay? So what I'm saying is that's what happened to the Neanderthals. If the Neanderthals would have mated with us, then every last one of them had to eventually mate with humans in order for their smaller population, as they say, maybe 10% of our population, to be diluted into our population, and eventually all Neanderthals disappeared. And again, one of the issues there is, what is a species? Were they the same species, or were the Neanderthals a different race? because that's another issue that Dutton had in his mind. He talks about race, and I say race is a political word, a political issue. It has nothing to do with science. In science, we talk about species. That's objective. Either you can have children or you can't, viable children. And if you can't, then you're two different species. And so, this notion that these people have that they call introgression, which is nonsense, idiocy. It's idiocy because it violates the definition of the word species. They say introgression means that two different species mate and they have a child back again. And they use that as, try to explain why, some like humans have Neanderthal DNA because there was introgression, or the Denisovans and any of those hominids. And so they're saying essentially there's been introgression, meaning two species, different species, because again, what is a species? That can have viable children. If they can't, they're two different species. They're saying these two different species had a viable children, a viable child or whatever, and they're contradicting the definition of species. And again, all these people never define their terms properly, scientifically, so they get out through loopholes. That's the problem with by not defining their terms. So no, the word introgression should be deleted, or we have to clarify the difference between introgression and species. Those two words are contradictory. Okay? You can't use them both. One has to go out the door. Okay, so what happened to the Neanderthals? Well, again, we have a little bit of a problem because humans have no Neanderthal mothers. Okay, we have no mtDNA, no mitochondrial DNA no human has any mitochondrial DNA from Neanderthals. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down by the mother to her children, and we have none among humans today. And so they have to explain this, and this comes out of the Wikipedia, and it references several papers. I put two of them there. And it says, due to the absence of Neanderthal-derived mitochondrial DNA, which is passed on from mother to child in modern populations, it has been suggested that the progeny of Neanderthal females who mated with modern human males were either rare, absent, or sterile. That is to say, admixture stems from the progeny of Neanderthal males with modern human females. So the way they explain this today is that, we men, we were smart. We were smart. We had good eyesight. And we saw that monkey there, and we said, I'm not going to sleep with that monkey. But the women, our women, they're just whatever. Maybe they sold their bodies for, I guess a handful of seashells. And so the Neanderthal came over and said, hey, cutie, you want to sleep with me tonight? I'll give you all these seashells, these rocks. And she did it. That's what they're saying. We have no mothers, but apparently we have fathers. It turns out we don't have fathers either, because they could find no Y chromosomes from Neanderthals, which are passed from father to son. So it says, due to lack of Neanderthal-derived Y chromosomes in modern humans, which is passed on from father to son, it has also been suggested that the hybrids that contributed ancestry to modern populations were predominantly females, or the Neanderthal Y chromosome was not compatible with Homo sapiens and became extinct. Okay, and again, those are the references there. There's a couple more. You can look this up. So let's see if I got this right. Humans don't have Neanderthal mothers because we have no mitochondrial DNA. Okay, great. We only have fathers. Turns out we have men today have no Neanderthal fathers because we have no Y chromosomes from Neanderthals. And still, in spite of these obvious pieces of evidence which they got out of the genome and so on, they keep saying, oh, but we interbred. Our forefathers interbred with Neanderthals. And they try to explain it away instead of taking the easy way, John of Occam's rule. Take the easier path They don't do that. They say, no, we have to prove interbreeding at all costs against all odds. And we had no Neanderthal mothers, we had no Neanderthal fathers, but we interbred with them. Yeah, sure. I think it's easier to suggest that we never had anything to do with the Neanderthals, okay, in bed. And so, yeah, again, it depends on what assumptions you make. And all this comes from the geneticists. And I explained that a couple of weeks ago, where the geneticists have taken over the Neanderthal paleontology business. And they call all the shots today. So the guy goes out there in the middle of the field, collects a bone, a paleontologist, Indiana Jones kind of style type of guy. He goes out to the middle of the mountains, dusts some bones off, brings them to the museum, assembles them, and he says, well, why did these guys disappear? What happened to them? And so they come up with all these theories. Well, it was the climate change. Maybe it was, we killed them. We went into their territories and started killing them. Maybe we outcompeted them. Maybe they couldn't stand, again, the cold, or who knows what happened. And the geneticist came over and says, oh, you guys are wrong. You know nothing. Let me tell you how they disappeared. They disappeared because they interbred with us. And here's the proof, 2% commonality in our DNA. And then they discover there's no mitochondrial DNA. We have no Y chromosomes, but we still intermarry because they have no other theory for extinction of the Neanderthals. And again, the question is, were the Neanderthals a different species? Could we have viable children, fertile children, or were our children sterile because we were so far separated, not so much in time, which is also an important factor, maybe 500, 6,000, 700,000 years ago, we had a common ancestor. But on top of that, Neanderthals went to the Arctic, Europe, and we were allegedly in Africa. Unless you got a better mousetrap, you got a better theory, fine. But I'm saying right now that those are my assumptions. I'm saying humans, Cro-Magnons, right, our forefathers, they came out of Africa. They went into Europe. They couldn't get into Europe because they were killed by the Neanderthals. As long as the Neanderthals were there, the clans. Once the Neanderthals were gone, we were able to get into Europe. And that was approximately 40,000 years ago when we conquered the land, conquered Europe. And as we advanced, the Neanderthals were receding because they were dying. They were dying what? Because their population pyramid overturned. The Neanderthals disappeared in a population implosion. It happened within their own world. And we couldn't have interbred because there's another argument there as well, which is how did the Heidelbergers, Homo heidelbergensis, how did he disappear? Did he mate with Neanderthal? Is that how he disappeared? How did Homo erectus or Homo antecessor, how did he disappear? Did he mate with Homo heidelbergensis? Is that how species disappear? They mate with the next one down and they get diluted into a bigger population? Again, it shows that geneticists have a mental problem. Okay, that's the way I look at that. They know. See, a geneticist is not a scientist. He has nothing to do with science. A geneticist is a person who just counts atoms. He doesn't even do it like, with beads on an abacus. He's got a computer that reads all these billions of base pairs and so on, and spits out the numbers, and he can compare them. That's it. So he looks at that and says, okay, this one coincides here, this one doesn't coincide there. And so far, all he is a stamp collector. That's all he is up to that point. It's when he gives you an explanation, a physical interpretation of what happened. That's when he crosses the line into science. That's where he gives you the most irrational explanation he can come up with, interbreeding in this case. And at that point, you stop him. You say, you're not a scientist. A scientist only gives a rational explanation. And what these people have to do is not tell me what percentage of our genes are or DNA come from Neanderthals. What they have to explain is how did these two species do it in the wild and have a fertile offspring. That's what they have to explain. If they cannot explain that, whatever they come up with is garbage. absolute garbage. So they don't tell me that we have 2% DNA. I don't care about that. I want you to tell me how they did it in the wild, how a lion mates with a tiger in the wild. That's what you got to explain. If you can't explain that, because that's never happened for sure, or even other animals, you can pick the animal you want. It's never happened in the wild, okay? Because there's no need for a chimp to visit the gorilla territory and have sex with a gorilla. And again, there was no need for Neanderthals to have sex with humans. Didn't they have females in the Neanderthal world? Were they so sick of them? They want to divorce and they want to marry a human? Are you kidding me or what? So that's what you got to explain. Anyone who talks about interbreeding or admixture between Neanderthals and humans, don't tell me what percentage Neanderthal DNA we have. Tell me how they did it in the wild. These two apex predators, how they, became neighbors and lovers. That's what you got to explain. Okay, another fellow raises an issue, says there's an Italian author who hired an artist to draw his own design of a Neanderthal. Yeah, I don't think he's Italian. I think he's Australian, and Vendramini. And, I looked at his stuff a long time ago. I don't subscribe to almost anything he says, except the fact that, that Neanderthals were very different than us. That's true. But, he also believes in that we mated with them. So he says we were so different that it's almost unbelievable, but we had children together. So, again, nothing different. Now the fellow raises the issue of Piltdown Man. He said, prove the frailty of fossil reconstruction. Yeah, we have this guy, Charles Dawson. I think I talked about him in the past. And he played a hoax on the anthropology / paleontology world. He filed some teeth and so on. So he created these skeletons. And he said, I have a new species, just to get his name in lights. Then he died. He died shortly after. He made all these discoveries, and he had discoveries for many years, by the way. Not one, just many. There's like 70 or 80 frauds that he committed, and they went back and studied a lot of these, and they found out he was a total fraud. On the one hand, it's good because it compels the paleontologists to be on their toes. Like, you can't just say anything you want, then later on discover that it wasn't like that, then you look like a fool. So now, if anything, this served to put the paleontologists on their toes. They have to be careful that someone doesn't put something out there that embarrasses them. Okay, a fellow says, regarding the definition of life, which again is the opposite of death, which is extinction, right? Concerning your definition of alive, okay, it's an object that moves against the path of least resistance, okay, specifically gravity, okay, but yeah. Considered molecule for molecule, doesn't literally everything take the path of least resistance? And all I can recommend is you go to the river and swim against the current. You'll be able to swim against the current if it's not a strong current, Rock can't do that. Okay, so just test it out for yourself, okay? Swim against the current, you'll find out that you can swim against the path of least resistance, something that a rock cannot do. Okay, again, we should do Extinction 101 before 102. That's one of the things that we did not do with Dutton. Okay? We should have done something like that. And there's a reason for that, okay? And I'm saying that first, before you can understand human extinction, you got to understand what a mass extinction is. And what has happened, no one has defined these terms. Like look at background extinction. What is a background extinction? Well, you look it up. Look up the term background extinction. You'll find it in the Wikipedia. And they talk about the background extinction rate. It's a rate. It's a mathematical thingy. And we don't know what a background extinction is, and they talk about the rate. No, so I had to define these terms because no one else did. And what is a background extinction? Background extinction is the disappearance of one species. Okay, that's what a background extinction is. Don't tell me what the rate is. Tell me the cause. Why does one species suddenly disappear from the record? You know, Neanderthal disappeared all by themselves. And you would think that woolly would have disappeared before Neanderthals because Neanderthals hunted woolies, well, the woolly mammoth, right? It turns out that woolly outlived them by 20,000 years. How can that possibly be if Neanderthals hunted woolies? Well, maybe that's not how species disappear, you know, by overhunting. Maybe there's something else going on. And that would, you know, turn your lights on that something is not quite right in this notion that people have that we, for example, overhunted the Neanderthals, killed them. No, maybe the Neanderthal disappeared for something totally different that has nothing to do with overhunting or overpredation or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so yeah, Willie also disappeared all by himself. No one got rid of him. People say, well, yeah, we killed him. That's all they can think of. We killed a Neanderthal. We killed the Willies. We killed the passenger pigeon. We killed the great auk. We killed the what is it? The tiger. The Tasmanian tiger. We killed them all. Yeah, sure. We're such mean people. The dodo bird. You know, we killed them all. So so the question that I have put in the past is, why do animals on land disappear more or less at the same time as the animals in the seas? Because if we can figure that out, that issue, then maybe we get a handle on what causes extinction. Why? What underlies a mass extinction? Okay, and for that I start with a definition. What is a mass extinction? And so we define the term, and the term is the disappearance of a food chain. Mass extinction, disappearance of a food chain. Now I wonder why they disappear. Maybe it's got something to do with food. What do you think? Okay. And so, you got to answer the question why the animals on land disappear approximately at the same time as animals in the seas. And one guy gave it a shot and he said, is the answer to your homework question about the sun or ground nutrients? Earth's surface nutritionally reaches critical mass approximately globally and needs to reboot. Thus land and sea dies. And there I have this chart which I made, and that's that doesn't happen. See, and I'll just give an example there, when the ferns were dying out, the conifers were already expanding. So it's not like the land dried up and then, you know, God invented the new plants again, invented conifers. No, it was there's a period in which both plants are on the planet. One is disappearing, the other one is expanding. And what happened to the conifers is the same thing. Conifers expanded for, almost 200 million years between the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. And what happens? They're expanding, but at some point they start declining, and what's occupying the land, are the angiosperms. And so it's not like, there's a total wiping out of one plant and then the other one starts out or continues or whatever. No, one is already alive and expanding, radiating at the same time the other one is declining. Okay, that's the history of life on Earth. We find conifers together with ferns all the way to, the beginning of the Permian. Okay. Another fellow says that maybe it's the oxygen cycle. It says primary producers emit gases, mainly O2, due to photosynthesis, whereas consumers produce CO2 in turn, which is absorbed by primary producers, which are more numerous. And again, this is the oxygen cycle. Another fellow has essentially the same explanations. He says, I remember having read as a teenager that the first great mass extinction was caused by O2 emitting microorganisms, which was toxic for all anaerobic organisms, including themselves. Okay? Newer organisms, on the other hand, were able to adapt and thrived on oxygen, creating a new ecological pyramid. Maybe a similar phenomenon occurs in cycles. I don't believe it's got to do with a carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, or oxygen cycle. The question of why animals on land disappear more or less at the same time as animals, in the seas. But a guy hit it pretty much on the nose, and I think I owe him a beer then. And then this is what he said. He said, Extinction 101, primary food producers in sea and land spawned only a few million years apart. Okay? Hence, their evolutionary lifespan is similar, and hence, rate of loss of genetic diversity, including population pyramid overturn of the plants and phytoplankton, maybe even the other plankton as well, the zooplankton. They disappeared more or less at the same time because they started out more or less at the same time. Is it because God ordained that? No, it's just because that's the history of life on Earth. There was a mass extinction more or less at the same time on land as in the seas. And then what started, the radiation that starts after that on land and in the seas, more or less starts at the same time. So they have more or less the same amount of time to live until that collapses as well. And so we're talking about big orders of plants, okay? And it takes millions of years for them to live and finally die. Their population pyramid overturns. And so, yeah, this fella hit it pretty much on the nose, and I owe you a beer, guy. Whenever we meet, I owe you a beer, okay? Take a rain check. Okay, here's the evolution of plants that supports that more or less. You can see that, again, this is the chart that I make regarding the big picture of what happened of life on Earth. And you can see that essentially, you can see the different ages. You had the Permian and Triassic, that's the age of synapsids, mammal-like reptiles. Those were the age of ferns, especially seed ferns. You had the Glossopteris in the middle of the Permian. I'm sorry, at the end of the Permian. And you had the dichroidiums that disappeared at the end of the Triassic. And so when those plants disappeared, it turns out, yeah, the animals disappeared together with them. And were the gymnosperms, were they born at that moment in time? No, the gymnosperms, the conifers, date all the way, I think even to the Carboniferous they found some, but for sure to the Permian. How about the angiosperms, the flowering plants? Well, they date to at least the middle of the Cretaceous. That's when they expanded, but you could take them all the way to Jurassic. So these plants lived together side by side, and the dinosaurs did not eat the angiosperms because they were born with conifers. There's no need for them to switch plants at the last moment, when the angiosperms are expanding at the expense of conifers, okay? Especially cycads and cycadioids and so on. Okay, final issue, fellow says, so my understanding of extinction was, referring to the Dutton talk the other day, that the cessation of technology to feed X billion causes a mass exodus that loots edibles beyond replenishment, resulting in chain extinction of human food sources. I don't think it's got to do with technology. It's got to do with the fact that no one produces the food, because right now we produce as much as we want. But the only reason we produce food is because of money, because of profits. And the agricultural corporations, as long as there are profits, they'll produce and distribute to the cities. But once money is no more, which is my argument, there's no need for these corporations to produce or distribute. And so the only issue we have to address then after that is, why will money disappear? Why will we refuse to accept money? That's the issue. Okay, so that's the one people want to get their brains around. Why would money disappear? But what I can guarantee to you is that if money disappears, right, for whatever reason, God comes in and waves his magic wand, I don't care. If money disappears, if we no longer accept money, okay, agricultural corporations will not produce food or distribute them to the cities. Without food, you are guaranteed to die. A mass extinction can be guaranteed if you remove the food from the planet, okay? So what the problem is right now, we produce our own food. We take it for granted because you go to the store and you say, well, I got all the food I want. Yeah, now because someone is putting it on the shelf for you. Someone's doing the hunting for you. Okay, and they put with a golden spoon in your mouth. And the question is, if money is gone, if there are no more profits, no more Bitcoin, no more fiat coin, no more gold, we don't accept any of that stuff anymore. Paper, plastic, gold rocks, because gold is just a rock, diamonds. We don't accept any kind of money because food is the only thing of value, and the only thing you're going to accept is food, and no one trades food in the jungle. Then if no one produces or distributes food, you're guaranteed to die. And you have a mechanism of a mass extinction right there. Okay? What is a mass extinction? The disappearance of a food chain. Okay, we got that? Okay, let's get on with the main subject of today, which is transparency in physics. What is transparency? Well, this week we did a little experiment, 3 experiments really with my son. More than experiments, just a verification kind of thing, okay? And some people say, oh, Bill, you're doing experiments. Don't hold it against me. In science, we don't do experiments. In science, we explain experiments. You can do all the experiments you want, but if you don't understand what you're doing, you haven't learned anything from doing your experiments, you're not a scientist. You're not a physicist. You're a physicist, a scientist, if you can explain how that happened. Then you're a scientist. But if you do an experiment and you say, okay, here's an experiment, I'll let go of the pen. You let go of the pen and it falls to the floor, to my desk in this case. Okay, so I do it, you got to do it repeatable for it to be scientific, right? Okay, let's do it 2 times at least, okay? So we have a repeatable experiment. We drop the pen 2 times. You want me to do it 1,000 times? It would take a little too long. 1,000,000 times, the pen falls to the floor, to the center of the earth. Great. So we did the experiment. You want to calculate how fast, all that stuff, go do it. I don't care. That's description. That's like saying, I'm going to describe a chair. You know, it's got 4 legs, a seat backrest, and 2 armrests. Great. Great math. And what have you explained? And so if I let go of the pen and it drops to the center of the earth and I do it 1,000,000 times, okay, I learned that the pen falls to the floor. I described it. I can do it mathematically and say how fast it goes, what the acceleration is, 9.8 meters per second square, whatever. What have you explained? We still don't know why. What causes that pen to fall to the floor? And so doing experiments is not science. Science is explaining. We're going to try to explain transparency today. So we did a couple of experiments with my son. Here's one of them. And what we do, we put a laser through air. Then we do it through glass. Okay. And then we poured some water in there. Okay. And you can see that water goes through, the laser goes through water as well. Okay. One more time, just in case. It goes through air, through glass, and through water, through all 3 of them. Okay, the laser. Here's through air. You can see it goes right through it. Air doesn't stop that laser. Okay. Goes through glass. You can see nothing's changed there. And when we pour water in there, it goes through water as well. So it goes through water, through air, and through glass, and all 3 of them at the same time. Okay, so we proved it. Okay, we proved it. Air, water, and glass are transparent. Proof. Please give me my Nobel. Okay. Okay, but we didn't stop there. We did another experiment. Okay, and this was something similar. And what we did here, we did it with a pencil, and here are the 3 possibilities. Here's the first one. First through air. Okay. Then we put it in glass, and you can see there's very little change. It's almost perfectly transparent. But when you put water in there, it kind of starts breaking the pencil. It breaks the pencil in 2. Okay, so you can see how the pencil got broken over there. Okay. Okay, so we have proven again that these are transparent. Okay, you can see right through the water and through the glass, through the air. You can see the pencil. The only thing that the water, you can say, is kind of distorts the image a little bit. And here was a third one, also along that same line. Okay. And we put two glasses, one with water and the other one without water. And you can see what happens with the one with water. As we take it up and down, it distorts the image of the pencil, whereas the glass doesn't. Okay, you see what's happening there? You go up and down with the one with glass only, and it's almost the same image. Whereas when you go with the one that's got a little bit of water in it, that was a curved glass, you can see that it distorts the pencil. And why is that a problem, or why is that significant? Well, because here you see some of the values for air, water, and glass. And you can see the molecules per cubic centimeter. For oxygen, you find 10 to the 19 molecules. Okay? Whereas for water and SiO2, glass, right, you find 10 to the 22 molecules. They're more or less in the same boat. There's a little difference there, but they've got the same exponent, whereas air doesn't. Okay? And there, for comparison, you see CO2, carbon dioxide, okay, also in the 22 range. Okay, so we have these three, they're in the 22 range, but look at the refractive index. And you see air, which is close to vacuum, 1, okay, triple 0 and a 3 there. Water, much higher, 1.3, 1 and 1/3. And SiO2, it's got a range of 1.4 to 155. In the industry, the semiconductor industry, we use 1.45. But what is strange about that is that you saw the distortion from water when we put the pencil inside the water and so on. And it turns out that the refractive index of SiO2 is significant, noticeably higher than water. And yet SiO2 is a perfect transparency, whereas water is not. Okay, so that's my point there, point that I'm trying to make there. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's see what's going on. Okay, here's a little GIF there. Here we have this glass of water. We have water in the center there. At the bottom we have glass. I put that crystal structure of SiO2, and it's fixed. It doesn't move too much, at least. It does move a little bit because it's somewhat fluid, glass is. Water moves a lot more, and I would say air moves even a lot more. Air is less dense than the other two. The other two have more or less, as you saw a minute ago, almost the same density. Okay, okay, what happens when we run light through this three system? In other words, through air, through water, and through glass. Well, here it is. Okay, if you shine light through it, well, you'll find that it goes right through all three of them, which is what we showed just now with the laser. The laser goes right through all three of them. Okay, but we have a little bit of a problem here, because see what you see there are waves. But what is a wave? Okay, so let's find out what this wave is. Let's look at it in a little more detail. And a wave is something that looks like this. It's a bunch of vectors. That's what it is. What is a vector? Well, it's got magnitude and direction. It's a mathematical concept. There's no physical object called wave. Wave is a verb. Okay? And you can see the arrows there. Those are the vectors. And they're moving up and down. And they're also moving sideways. It's the very scary stuff, you know, very strange thing. You have these vectors, numbers, that are moving up and down. They also move sideways. Concepts, mathematical concepts that move. Very scary stuff. So there is no such thing as a wave. Anyone using a wave is not doing physics. He's doing math. Okay? The theorist has to tell the crowd what it is that is waving. And there's a whole bunch of people out there that say, well, nothing is waving. We never figured out what it is that's waving. Well, then we will not allow you to use the microphone. You're not allowed to give your talk. You have a lot of work to do to figure out what it is that's waving. You should go back to your dark basement, erase your board, and begin brainstorming again. You gotta identify what it is that is waving. Until then, you can't use the word wave and say, oh, wave is what went through water, wave is what went through oxygen, a wave is what went through silicon dioxide. You can't do that because there is no such thing as a wave. Wave is forbidden in the world of physics. Okay, so what do the people do usually in quantum mechanics? Well, they replace the wave with particles. So now we're going to run particles through there and say, see, the particles go through air, go through water, and go through glass. Okay, no problem. I mean, we can live with that. What's the problem? The problem, at least from our current understanding, or the way quantum mechanics presents this to the world, is that this is their atom. This is their atom, and that's their photon. That's their energy, whatever energy is, a concept also, a mathematical concept. And that blue ball that's going around, that's the electron. And the green little squiggly arrows that are coming out of there, that's light. And it's known as energy also, energy, light, whatever you want to call it. And that's not a physical object either. It turns out that the little ball that's going around not only is a point particle, meaning there's no physical object there called an electron, because it has no size. That's the official version. But we have another problem. Even if it did have size and it was a ball, why doesn't it fall to the nucleus? What prevents it from flying out of the atom spontaneously? So until you can answer those questions, you don't even have a hypothesis for what this photon is or what an electron is. We have problems with both. Okay, so you can't use the particle of quantum mechanics. You could use it if the electron and the photon are corpuscles. You know, like in classical mechanics, they used to think in terms of corpuscles, little grains of dust, balls, whatever you want to call those. It was a something. It had diameter, it had size. That's not what the quantum mechanics mechanicers are talking about. What they're talking about is something that has no size, no volume, zero dimensional, okay, no radius, no diameter. We're talking about a nothing. Why? Because they're talking about a function. They're talking about an equation. That's what it is, a number. So you can't use the quantum particle, quotations on that word particle. You can't use that because it's not a particle. It's not a physical object for the purposes of physics. You're not allowed to give a physical interpretation with that concept. Okay? Because a particle is not an object, it's an abstract concept. It's a mathematical concept. More specifically, it's an equation, a function. Okay, so you can't use those. But if you're going to simulate with corpuscles, okay, then these are the variables that you have to consider when you're looking at transparency, at what goes through air, water, glass. Okay, and here you see the different variables that you might encounter that you have to consider. This is more or less a brainstorm here, okay? For interaction, the corpuscle either strikes an atom, travels through the atomic diameter. Remember, Rutherford said, an atom is mostly empty space. And that's what people repeat today as dummies because they don't know any better. Because if it's mostly empty space, again, you got to explain why the electron doesn't fly away. Okay, what's holding the electron to the proton, assuming the electron was a ball? A little dust particle, or has size, and so they can't explain either. So they don't have a physical interpretation, but they say, okay, assuming it is a corpuscle, it goes through the center of the atom. It goes through anywhere within the volume of the atom, or it can go between atoms. So those are the three possibilities as far as interaction. Either it collides, okay, with the atom. It goes through the atom, meaning really the proton in the center, like Rutherford did. He sent atoms directly at that center and they bounce back, right? So it either collides, bounces back, okay, ricochets, reflects, goes through, or goes through in between two atoms, the space between two atoms. Those are the possible interactions of photon with matter, okay? Density, a few molecules per centimeter cube, many molecules per centimeter cube. Is transparency an issue of how many molecules, how much substance a thing has. Okay, that's another issue you got to consider, another variable possibility. How about motion? Well, of the substance, right? Well, it could be a solid, a liquid, fluid, or gaseous, and those are a function of temperature. But the deal is, is transparency an issue of how solid something is? Okay, that's another variable you have there, another factor. Frequency. Well, we can't really use frequency if you're going to use the wave unless you identify what the wave is, what it is that's waving. You got to identify that. But assuming you can identify that, well, then you have three possibilities. Either it's within the visible range, okay, or outside the visible range. Either it's below infrared or above ultraviolet. Okay, so those are the possibilities there. Okay, and so how do these people answer these questions? Which ones are they going to use to explain transparency? Here's how stuff works. And they chose really that density one, whether there's few molecules or many molecules. How stuff works says air is a gas. Compared to a solid, air contains very few atoms and is very light. Think about a balloon filled with air compared to a balloon filled with sand. The air balloon is incredibly light compared to the sand balloon, okay? That's because there are many more atoms in sand than in air. So they're going to do this on a basis of how much matter there is in there, okay? Because air contains so few atoms, light waves run into very few of them, and when they shine through air. So the air looks transparent. If you put enough dust in the air, the particles of dust absorb the light and the air stops being transparent. Okay, so how stuff works says, well, this is an issue of how much matter you've got there. I guess how many walls of atoms. A lot of people have this notion also that it's a question of how many atoms there are widthwise. How many atoms the beam of light has to go through. Okay? Another fellow says, no, this is totally wrong, which gives me an idea that they still don't have it settled. Okay, I mean, if How Stuff Works, which is a pretty prominent site on the internet, gives a wrong answer, that means the mechanics don't have any idea how this thing really works. They're all kind of, giving ideas, brainstorming ideas. And this fellow says, quantity of atoms have no bearing on transparency. If the chemical bonds in a substance have the right energy to absorb in the visible spectrum, you can see through it. If they absorb in the infrared and ultraviolet instead, such as glass, light travels through. And so again, they're talking about this frequency wave that you see there at the bottom, visible range, above visible range, or below the visible range. Okay, this is what this fellow is suggesting. Okay, and this is more or less the party line today because, by the way, this fellow does give an example, and he does it with iodine. He says, look, if you have a glass, okay, out there, a beaker, you can see right through the beaker, okay? But if you put iodine in an iodine gas, which is lighter than glass, in other words, it's less dense than gas, suddenly you can't see through there. You can see it becomes more and more opaque. And the question is, then it's not an issue of how many atoms you have in there, because there you see it, the gas is less dense than glass, and yet glass you can see through, and through this you can't. Which is more or less what I said about, what you saw earlier about the refractive index through glass versus refractive index through water. Okay, let me get rid of this. Get rid of this too. Okay, so the party line is essentially that. It says that the light is knocking on an electron. And remember, a little electron ball has no size, and yet this photon, which also has no size, is going to hit this no size electron. And it's going to hit it so that it knocks it into a different energy level. And so you wonder how how a photon, man, it's got very good aim. It's going to hit this non-existent electron and move it into a higher energy level. Does that make any sense to you? You know, a zero-dimensional photon hitting a zero-dimensional electron. And even if it did hit, I mean, how many photons are you going to need to hit one of these electrons? I mean, how many electrons does hydrogen have? Like one? Okay, so hopefully you throw a shower of photons to hit that electron and boost it to a higher or lower energy level, right? Okay, so this is more or less the, if I can get it up here. Give me a second here. This is the version of the establishment. Materials are transparent to those wavelengths of light. Again, wavelength, what is that? I don't know. I don't know what a wave is. For which there is no mechanism within the material to absorb those wavelengths. Okay? Glass, electrons require much more energy before they can skip from one energy band to another and back again. Okay, so again, we're saying the photons have such good aim, they hit this non-existent electron, the zero-dimensional electron, and boost it to a different energy level. That's the explanation. Consequently, photons of visible light travel through glass instead of being absorbed or reflected. Okay, and they continue. Okay, here's the other version, the complementary part to this. Okay, it says glass, silicon dioxide, absorbs light in the infrared and the ultraviolet wavelength ranges. Infrared radiation can stimulate mechanical vibrations in the molecular bonds of the material, hence is absorbed. Ultraviolet radiation is energetic enough, remember high frequency, right, to free some electrons from the molecular bonds, thus is absorbed. Okay? In the range between infrared and ultraviolet radiation, in other words, the visible range, neither atomic vibrations nor electron transitions are stimulated. So those wavelengths are transmitted and the material is transparent. These are their explanations today. Okay? What's the problem? Again, the problem we have is that they don't use objects, they don't use things, they use mathematical concepts. They're reifying these concepts, turning them into physical objects. They talk about electrons when electron is a zero-dimensional nothing, and they talk about photons, which is another zero-dimensional nothing. They talk about energy bands, which is a mathematical concept. We have no physical object in front of us, yet they're trying to give you a physical interpretation for transparency. They're trying to explain to you why oxygen, air, water, and glass are transparent. Okay, so I mean, if they're going to later on say that that's just philosophy, well, okay, then why did you try to do philosophy in the first place? Why did you try to explain it? Why didn't you stay within the realm of math and just do your stupid equations? Why did you have to come into physics and try to give it a physical interpretation, which is bunk, which is nonsense, and then at the end say, well, after all, we don't understand it, it's philosophy anyways, it's not part of our discipline, it's not part of science. If it's not, then why the hell did you try to give a physical interpretation and give the semblance of knowledge, give the impression that you knew something? This is where the problem is. Okay, what is it under the rope model? This is our version, okay? First we go with the variables, and they're similar, but a little different because we have interconnectivity. Remember, the rope model says that all atoms in the universe are interconnected, and they're connected by pair-twined DNA like ropes. Okay, so we have two threads, they're twined, it torques, and it stimulates both atoms simultaneously. Light travels both ways, so to speak. In other words, the torsion happens or impacts the atoms at the two ends at the same time. Okay, that's why I see you, you see me. The ropes are pumping in both directions simultaneously. Okay, the rope ends in an atom. That's the connectivity. Or it can run through the atom. Remember, what is our atom? Our atom is a balloon, and we're saying it runs through the atom. Okay, that's another possibility. Or it can run between two atoms. Okay, extend between two atoms. Okay, motion, again, we have a solid, fluid, and gaseous, depending on how fluid something is. Okay. Frequency, now we can talk about link length, not wavelength, because we don't know what a wave is. These people are still trying to figure that out. They're in their dark basement trying to brainstorm, find out what this wavy thingy is. And we've already told them here we do have a physical object. It's a rope. Looks more or less like this. This is what a rope looks like. Okay. Two threads twined around, DNA-like, no questions asked, hopefully. Okay, very straightforward. And we're talking about link length, the length of a link. Okay, there's a link. Okay, and so if it's within the visible range, okay, between infrared and ultraviolet, which is a question of how long the link is, okay, or if it's outside, either below infrared, above ultraviolet. Those are the constraints. And then density, again, how many molecules per centimeter cube, okay? And there is an experiment you should do at home. Let me get this out of here. Okay. And it looks more or less like this. You take a laser pointer, okay? I'm going to shine it at my, hopefully you can see it there. See, there. Okay. Black shirt. Okay, and if you put a cardboard in front, you can see that I'm making the, can't do both at the same time. Okay, there it is. See, it disappears when I put the cardboard in front of it. Look how thin it is. Very thin. Okay, you can see it. Very thin piece of cardboard. And the laser doesn't go through it. But the laser, as you just saw, went through water, through air, a lot more atoms there. In fact, don't take my word for it. Go to the nearest pool, swimming pool near your home. You can see to the bottom of, 10 feet of water. You can see your reflection down at the bottom. That means light went from you all the way to the bottom, through all those same atoms, all the way to your eye again. That's why you can see yourself reflected down there, unless you believe that you're reflected from the top. But you could see things at the bottom of the pool, so you can see through that whole layer of water. And certainly that whole layer of water has a little more thickness, meaning a lot more material, a lot of more atoms, a lot more molecules than this piece of cardboard. So it's not a question of how much matter there is. It's primarily a transmission in the case of quantum mechanics, if they could explain what is going through there, what corpuscle or whatever, what particle, what thing is going through there. In the case of the rope, all we have is one atom connected to another atom, which is connected to another atom by a DNA-like rope entity, okay? And it looks more or less like this. Okay, here you see it. Okay, so we have light going to the water, going right through air. Why? Because it's connected to all these atoms. Okay, and of course I've only shown two ropes here, and you have to think of this also not as something moving as you see there, because that changes from second to second. Okay, what we have is ropes attached to ropes, and what is being not transmitted but relayed are the signals from one atom to another. Okay, that's why these what quantum says essentially is correct. It's a question of transmission. It's not that light goes through all these atoms. It's that it's connected to the atom, and the atom retransmits the signal by relaying it. It receives this this vibration, and it retransmits it to another atom, which retransmits it to another atom. It's a relay race. Okay. And again, those atoms are connected to each other, and so they receive the same stimulus all the way down the line. So it's another mechanism that we're proposing, a physical mechanism that you can sink your teeth into, and that's that it's not transmitted, because the way they explain it in quantum mechanics is light hits an atom, strikes it, right, because it throws this little photon ball, which is not a ball, that hits the atom, really hits the electron, which is not a ball either. It's a nothing. But somehow it hits it, very good aim. And by doing so, that electron is able to retransmit that photon to another atom, which receives, whose electron receives and retransmits it, and so on down the line. So it's a relay race, but in quantum, it's not a relay race because it's a hitting race. Okay, one hits the other one, and it's a chain reaction in a sense. Under the rope model, it's a relay race because one atom sends the signal to another, the torsion signal to another, which retransmits that same torsion signal to another. Why? Because that atom is pumping. Remember, it's a balloon, and that balloon is expanding and contracting, quantum jump, and that's what's being stimulated. That retransmits, relays, that same signal to the atom behind it, and so on the line. So yeah, it's primarily a mechanism of relay. That's what it is under the rope model. Okay, let's look at our conclusions today. Okay, here we have it. Air, water, and glass are transparent. And I have to state that because there are people who, when they're asked that question, especially if you go to Quora, they go on a tangent and say, well, you know, if you pour ink inside the water, and they go off on all these tangents. No, let's bring rational people in. Let's see if we can address the question. And the question is, are air, water, and glass transparent? The answer is yes. Period. Boom. Stop. Okay? Yes, they are transparent. Okay, transparency is not a function of quantity of substance, how thick something is. It's a question of whether light can be retransmitted. That atom has the ability to retransmit. Remember, you can have water, for example, and it's completely clear. You can see right through it. You put some red ink in there, you know, and suddenly it gets cloudy, and you can't see through that red ink for some reason. So it's the red ink, the stuff that you put in there, that somehow is preventing the transmission of that light. Now it reflects that light. It absorbs and only allows the dispersion of this red light, which is being reflected back to your eyes. Okay, and under the rope model, retransmission is relay. Okay, it's a relay type of race. Okay, I just explained that. Quantum mechanics has no justification for the transverse wave. Quantum mechanics proposes that a particle is a function, or an equation. Therefore, both quantum mechanics proposals are irrational. They cannot explain a physical mechanism. They cannot provide a physical interpretation to transparency. Okay? And with that, we close that subject. Okay? So you're welcome to ask questions for next week. Meanwhile, let's address the questions that people asked since last time. Okay, one fellow says, mass, mass. Mass is how much matter an object contains. No. People learn that in high school. They learn it by rote, and people should start parroting what they don't understand. Okay? And mass is a constant for a body that doesn't change with location. Absolutely not. Okay? Mass changes together with weight, with location. Okay? The kilogram is a unit of mass, and it's also a unit of weight. You say, Bill, what are you talking about? Okay, so we take le kilo, you know, the old standard, because now they have a new standard for weight, for the kilogram. And did we count how many atoms are in that kilogram, in that standard? No. The way we determined the kilogram is by weighing it. We say this is 1 kilogram of mass and 1 kilogram of weight. You say, Bill, I'm going to fool you. I'm going to take it to the moon. And you're going to see that the weight changes, but the mass remains the same. And how do you know the mass remained the same if you didn't count atoms, which is what this guy is saying the quantity of matter. Quantity of matter, I hope you counted every atom in there. Is that what you did? Or did you weigh it? See, you say the weight changed, but mass did not, but it turns out mass weight change as well, together with a mass, with the weight, because the way you determine mass is by weighing. No mathematicians on planet Earth ever was able to separate, to isolate mass from weight. They give you this lip service saying, well, mass is the quantity of matter, and it turns out that's not true either. Okay, and here you have, don't take my word for it, let's get some big shots here. Okay, we have here Mr. John Wheeler, famous so-called mathematical physicist, and Mr. Edwin Taylor, another one, and it says nature, they wrote this in Space-Time Physics, nature does not offer us any concept as the amount of matter. History has struck down every proposal to define such a term. Even if we could count number of atoms or by any other counting method try to evaluate amount of matter, that number would not equal mass. And it should have become quite evident, because if to those who are into mathematical physics, okay, you go to the physics fact, frequency asked questions, you'll find that they try to explain relativistic mass. What the hell is relativistic mass? Well, it has to do with speed. It has to do not with quantity of matter, because they're not saying that as you accelerate something, it picks up more matter, more atoms, more molecules into that substance. So if I were to accelerate, I don't know, this pen, right? What they're saying, if you accelerate it close to the speed of light, its mass increases. Special relativity, okay? That's what they say. Okay, so its mass increases. Why did it increase? What are we saying? Did more atoms accumulate, and the pen accumulated more atoms, more molecules? Is that what happened? Or is it a question of speed, pressure, how far, how close it is to something, gravity? See, because if mass increases with speed, then mass is weight. What they've been talking about is weight. And if they say that relativistic mass is a special type of mass, yeah, it's weight. That's all they said. And again, it means mass and weight have no difference between them. And here, just in case, icing on the cake, we have how they measure some things. And this is just from, you can just Google this. It says, what objects weigh 1 kilogram? I thought kilogram was a measure of mass. And here they say weigh, okay? And so they go through all these examples of what weighs 1 kilogram, and they say all weigh approximately 1 kilogram. Then they give some other examples there. Okay, so what is mass? Well, it's measured in kilograms. What is weight? Well, for some reason, it's also measured in kilograms. So I guess mass and weight are the same thing after all, right? Okay, another issue fellow brings up says, that same fellow, I think, yeah. Mass, a coherent, defines it. Mass, a coherent, typically large body, absolutely not, mass is not a body, of matter with no definite shape. No, concepts don't have shape. And mass is a mathematical concept. So no, it doesn't have shape. Sorry to inform you. And then you look up the definitions in encyclopedias and Wikipedia and hyperphysics and so on. And what do you find for mass? Well, it's a measure of something. It's a resistance. It's a property. It's a measure, property, measure. All concepts. So mass is not a thing. You can't say a mass did a mass did that. It's not a body. It's not a shape. Okay, so you got to learn the basics before you get into physics. Okay, you should take a course in physics so that you learn the basics at least. Okay, fellow says something about weight. Okay, it says weight is the force exerted on mass by gravity, and so is mass. Weight is the amount of matter that something is made of, which you said is mass. Weight is not a constant. It changes from place to place, and so does mass, because we never count atoms. When we take the le kilo to the moon, we weigh it, and that's how we determine its mass. So again, we're going around in circles. We're going around in circles because they never defined mass in such a way that they could isolate it from weight. We determine mass by weighing. We don't count atoms. That's why Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Taylor there said that mass is not the amount of matter. And then the black hole, you've heard my argument on that when you have a circular argument. Black hole crushes all matter out of existence. It turns out black holes have mass, but no matter. So mass cannot be the quantity of matter, right? And so we're back to square one because, again, crushes out of existence. Black hole has mass, but it has no matter. Circular argument. Mathematics has that constantly. That's because, in great measure, because they never define these terms. Okay, what is matter? This fellow talks about matter. Okay, let's see what this is. Matter, physical substance. That's how he defined it. Well, we got a problem because the word physical and the word substance are synonym with the word matter. What is physical? That which is material, matter. Okay, substance, physical matter, or material, a species of matter. Material, what is that? It's a substance, or a substance of which a thing is made of. So we don't have a definition because all they use is synonyms. Okay, so no, that's not what matter is. In science, physics, we define matter as the set, I guess you could say, of objects that exist. Set of objects that exist, we call that matter. Could be a subset, and if that's what you're going to use for your presentation, your talk, and you say, well, this is a small part, we're going to call this matter. It's all the objects there that exist. Okay, so that's what it is. Only objects that exist form the word matter. Okay, another issue a fellow raises, he says, magnets. Aha. Magnets do not attract each other. Okay. They both move towards a null point in counter space. Ooh, counter space. That's when all the space you need on the counter for your beer, okay, that's called counter space. Okay. There is no such thing as magnetic attraction. Okay. If you don't understand ether, you don't understand reality. Yeah, we do understand ether, at least in this side. Here's the ether. Okay, it's just so you know what the ether is for everybody there. Okay. That's the ether. It's a bunch of particles that supposedly are within space. Some people equate the particles with space and say that space and those particles are the same thing. But essentially, the ether is the vibration of those particles. And that's what they say light is, or that's what they thought it was in the 19th century. That, the light is simply the vibration of the ether, meaning a bunch of particles. Okay. And so that's the ether. We know what the ether is now. The question is there such a thing as ether? And the answer is absolutely not. We have no use for the word ether because ether is a term of religion, not of science, not of physics. Okay, we have no use for ether. Ether essentially amounts to mereology, what something is made out of. And they're saying that the wave is made out of all these particles. And okay, we can accept that, but the question is you cannot explain a single phenomenon with that because you would have to explain why the particle goes up and down among other things. If it's going to wave, how is it waving? Well, the particle has to go up and then has to go down. And the question is what is pulling the particle or pushing the particle up? What is pushing or pulling the particle down? Are all these particles tied to each other by some little thread or something? So you got to explain all that stuff before you can use the word wave in terms of the ether. Okay, another issue, fellow says, how do you explain ropes in making matter from light, which we have recently achieved? Oh, very simple. Under the rope model, it's straightforward. Turns out the rope is which makes light, right? Which is that thing there, also makes the atom. So it's straightforward. There you have matter being made out of the same threads that make up the rope. We're done. Okay, very straightforward. Good. So yeah, the rope turns into light, which turns into atoms, which turns into light, which turns into atom ad infinitum. Okay, another fellow asks or brings up the issue of plasma. He says plasma physics is a mystery to the standard model cosmologists. Okay, they recognize, of course, that plasma is the what? Fourth state of matter. Okay, there's no physical object called the fourth state of matter that I know of, okay, but maybe you can bring it to the conference room and say, this is the fourth state of matter. Here it is. This is what it looks like. Okay? But the puzzle piece doesn't fit their model, other pieces, and so it is ignored. Indeed, it requires the understanding that all matter is composed of elements created by the dielectric force, magnetism, and which field is the ether of magnetism, dielectric force, la la la, okay? And voila, the universe in which they merge also creates gravity as a byproduct. Yeah, there's no such thing as plasma, no physical object. Plasma is, I mean, if you define it as the fourth state of matter, for sure there's no physical standalone object called fourth state of matter. Okay, so, and if you can define the word, it cannot be an object. Objects we point to, okay, and name them. Plasma is ionized gas, ionized atoms. That's what plasma is defined as, and if it's defined, it's a concept. It's not a physical object. Why? Because ionized means something is happening. A kangaroo that is jumping is not an object. Kangaroo is an object. If the kangaroo is jumping, a jumping kangaroo does not qualify as an object. It's a movie. Objects are statues. They don't move. You point to them and say kangaroo. If it jumps, now you got a movie, now you got a concept, a dynamic concept. And plasma is a dynamic concept. It's not a physical object. There's no such physical object standalone called plasma. Okay? Plasma is not a thing. Plasma is a thing in motion. And there you see an example. Okay? So you can't use the word plasma as a physical object in science, in physics. Okay? Not everybody understands that, especially the people from the electric universe. They have a hard time understanding that their beautiful hypothesis, their plasma, is not a physical object. Oh man, it drives them up the walls. Okay, another fellow says, didn't NASA state a couple years ago that our atmosphere expands beyond the moon and that the space between the Earth and the moon isn't actually space because it's full of hydrogen? No, the vacuum level between the Earth and the moon is 10 to the minus 11 torr. It's been measured a couple times at least, okay? And so there's very little matter per cubic centimeter, okay? That's one issue. The other one is that you're probably confusing it with the fact that quantum mechanics says that space is made out of particles. You know, you have a positive particle and a negative particle. They get together and they form a no particle. And then that no particle can separate between positive and negative particles. That's what quantum mechanics says. Maybe that's where you got the idea that it's full of hydrogen. No, it's not full of hydrogen. It's full of positrons and electrons. That's essentially their argument. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Okay. Paul says, this is the Walensky guy. Okay, it says, I find Jeffrey Walensky's stellar metamorphosis the most convincing. Yeah, just no problem there, except that Jeff did not come up with that. Okay, I've got a video on that. Okay, you can look it up. The Earth is older than the sun. That's the name of the video. You can look it up. But if you look at the video, I gave credit to Jeff Walensky because I thought originally that it was his. Further research showed that it's Mr. Alexander Oparin. He came up with it in 1924, a little earlier before Mr. Walensky was born. Okay, in the book called The Origin of Life on Earth, he says the following. Let me get this higher. It says, there was a time when the Earth, too, was passing through the same stage of development as the sun, namely that of being a yellow star. Okay. Later, as it gradually radiated its heat outwards into the cold interplanetary space, it became cooler and cooler. It turned from a yellow star into a red one. Its light became dimmer and dimmer and finally went out altogether. The Earth became a dark planet. Mr. Oparin says that the Earth was a star. Okay, and I put a video out there. I gave credit to Mr. Walensky erroneously, and I do clarify that in the description. So you got to read the description of that video to find out who really came up with this theory. It's Mr. Oparin. Mr. Walensky did not add a single grain of sand to that idea. Okay, so he should not get any credit for that, and I'm really sorry that he misled me. I thought it was a good idea, and the reason I think it's a good idea for two reasons, really. One is that it explains why the Earth is round. Okay, it's round because the Earth was a star, and if you look at the star, any star, it's differentiated like the Earth is. In other words, it's got the heavier elements in the center, and as you go outwards, you get the lighter elements until you get to the completely to the skin of the planet, which is what? A gas enclosure, oxygen, nitrogen, and so on, gases. So the Earth is structured like a star. And it turns out that all roundish, spherical, celestial objects were stars. If they're dead, I mean, if they're like Mercury or rocky planets or rocky moons or rocky asteroids. But when you get to Jupiter and some of these, Saturn, Uranus, all these are big gaseous planets. They are stars that never ignited. That's a little different process. But the Earth was a star at one point in time, and what's left, this is the cinder of that star, and that's what became the Earth. And why is the Earth older than the sun? Because the Earth was already there when the sun finally ignited and just captured the Earth in its orbit. So the Earth was already there thousands, billions of years before the sun ever came to be. The sun could have formed, I have no problem with that, with the nebular hypothesis, for those who know what I'm talking about, and captured the Earth, which was a little stone, or what was left of an ancient, very ancient star. And that's what Mr. O'Brien came up with. Okay, two more things here, two more questions. One fellow says, get this up here. According to the Wikipedia, at the moon's surface, the beam laser is about 6.5 kilometers, 4 miles wide. He's talking about the retroreflector, the lunar ranging experiment, okay, that I covered the other day. So even if the moon relative speed is around 1 kilometer per second, it should be easy to hit the retroreflectors. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not. Okay, so let's get it right. They shine the laser, very powerful laser, at the retroreflector, which they more or less know where it's at. It's close to a crater, so they point the laser somewhere near that crater, and they know they're going to hit the retroreflector even though they cannot see it. But they know that if they receive a signal back, they know they hit that retroreflector. And that's what the detector on Earth captures, puts it into a computer, and then they see a peak and they say, okay, we hit the reflector. What do they do that for? For lunar ranging. What is lunar ranging? They're trying to figure out how far the moon is and whether it's going farther away or closer to the Earth. That's what the experiment is for. But it's a good test for light, because you see there what's happening. If the Earth shoots these photons, these discrete photons, it has to go first in a curve, because it has to go through warp space downwards. So if the Earth is weighing the space-time downwards so that the moon can move around it like a roulette, well then the photons are balls are sliding through, which are not balls, by the way, but all these photon balls, these little particles, they have to roll down the same warp space to reach the moon. Is that what they do? They shoot them so perfectly that they know that light is going to curve through warp space? No. What they do, they shoot it directly at the crater. And they know that they're going to find the retroreflector more or less, what is it, a 6.5 kilometer radius or diameter. Okay, so they know they're going to hit it. Why? Because light is not a bunch of particles and there's no such thing as space-time. That's why. Because if there was a thing such as space-time and photons were little balls, they would roll down that, warp space, and we would never get a single photon back. That's not what they do. They point it directly at the retroreflector. That's how that works. Okay, and remember, you have to factor in there that the Earth is moving at 30 kilometers per second around the sun, And the moon is rolling 1 kilometer per second around the Earth. So it's moving, when one guy moves, the other guy's moving around. So the moon is moving faster than the Earth in that sense, okay? So not only are they moving, but then you have warp space, you have these little photon balls rolling down warp space. How did they do it? No, they point it directly at the retroreflector at the crater and they get a signal back. Okay, last one here. Fellow says, what's the rope made of? Well, that's the easiest question I got today. The rope is made of threads. See how easy it was? You have two twined threads. You want to call them strings, wires, coaxials, whatever you want to call it, no problem. I call them threads. So it's made out of two threads, twined threads. See how easy it was? That's what the electromagnetic rope is made out of. Okay, with that, I will see you on Wednesday, and we'll continue battering the mechanics, quantum mechanics, the most irrational theory you can